Thank you very much. Prime Minister, Secretary General of the Nordic Council and ministers from that council, distinguished guests, researchers, activists, artists, troublemakers, good afternoon. Sexual harassment isn't new. We've known about it for a very long time. Some people have worked on the issue for 40 years or longer. They've given us the language and the legal basis for claims. Yet it's taken a movement of people across the world, overwhelmingly women, to make it into an unavoidable issue in our work in ways that hadn't happened before and that would otherwise not have happened now. MeToo brings us here today. It has had massive media attention, has brought women together in common cause, prompted legal changes, and has driven worker actions. It's even ensured that some men have lost their positions, and it's captured the popular imagination in ways that most of us could not have predicted. MeToo has uncovered harms and injustices. It has demanded change. We do have more to do to ensure active and safe speaking for those people and places that have not been at the center of our conversations. And I acknowledge that we need to do more to listen, to make it safe for people in domestic work, in the informal sector, and others who are undocumented, perhaps, to tell their stories and to demand their justice. Speaking remains dangerous. It remains risky. It can bring harm. It can bring injury. It can bring exile or even death. Just one tragic example that I mourn today is Nusrat Jahan Rafi, who was killed earlier this year at the age of 19 for denouncing harassment by her teacher. The pushback is all too real. The conference themes ask us, why now, what next, and they profile the Nordic countries. And I would like to address each of these in turn as I address the question, how do we end the inevitability of sexual harassment? As has been explained, UN Women created my role to lead our work on sexual harassment in the light of the rightful noise that has been made around the world, including in the UN, on sexual harassment. And we're very fortunate to have engaged, as an advisor on this work, Professor Catherine McKinnon, who I believe will be known to many of you, and her work on this issue informs our new publication, and it is reflected in the words that I will be sharing today. Sexual harassment discussions are happening with urgency in many places, in universities, at Google, at the UN, in parliaments, in legislatures, in humanitarian and aid sectors, in entertainment industries. The movement has created a moment, with women occupying the power of solidarity, using social media, pushing us from a focus instead of looking at whether somebody's believable, whether they're credible. As with other forms of sexual violence and abuse, women are tended to not be believed, and ask us to shift instead to focus on accountability of perpetrators and the pursuit of justice. Of course, sexual harassment is about the exercise of power sexually to define others or leverage sexual behavior for something the powerful can deny or can gift, whether that's promotion, decent shifts, or a job. Sexual harassment tends, as we say in the new publication, to follow the contours of inequality, with men being primary perpetrators and women being primary targets. Of course, men also experience sexual harassment, and those who do can be diminished for not being real men who can handle and take control of sexual behavior. Beliefs about innate male sexual voraciousness, of sexual mastery, and dominance can undermine or belittle men who either find these norms uncomfortable or actively reject them. Expressed as heterosexual norms, that is, sexual mastery by men over women, these too exemplify gender discriminations and assumptions of male sexual entitlement. We offered last year a summary of where we think sexual harassment should be defined, how we should approach issues of policy, procedure, and practice. And we proposed that the definition include these key elements. Recognition that it is a violation of human rights, primarily of gender discrimination, but also intersecting with other vectors of social inequality. That sexual harassment can take a range of forms, from looks to words to contact, to sexual assault, to rape. It is not what people popularly want to trivialize as women having no sense of humor to take sexual jokes. Sexual harassment is not premised around the concept of consent. Consent can be given under conditions of inequality. Instead, we look at the concept of unwelcomeness. And we recognize that the sexual harassment takes place in creating a hostile environment, whether at work or in a university or elsewhere, and that it can take the form of an exchange of sexual servicing for livelihood or for success in university. And yes, we must change our policies, our procedures, and our practices to make them work in the interests of those who've been harassed. Because obfuscation, delays, complexity in managing reports made in an organization, unequal treatment of those who report against those who face allegations, they all discourage reporting and ensure there is minimal chance of holding an abuser to account. We know it's very hard for those who denounce sexual harassment to be heard with respect and belief, and in fact, believe me, has been one of the most common calls of the MeToo movement. We know that people can be reluctant to believe allegations against their bosses or admired academics or people who have been helpful to them. And it's no surprise that when women, people with disabilities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans colleagues challenge the abusers, they can be held in judgment rather than the perpetrators, because they are not behaving as others expect them to, because they challenge the power that is used against them, because they step outside the roles and the stereotypes that are expected to contain and define them. And this goes beyond policy and procedure, and it becomes an issue of culture, of beliefs, of attitudes, of how people understand, accept, or deny gender norms, racial or ethnic stereotyping, and of the ease with which stigma attaches to victims rather than perpetrators. All cultures are gender unequal, with men at the top and women at the bottom. This is not a cultural particularity. How it's manifest and how it is challenged may well differ, but its existence does not. Thank you, Prime Minister and the Nordic Council, for not allowing this discussion to be framed in issues around poverty or cultural specifics or geography. Violence against women, human rights violations of gender inequality exist everywhere, including, and this is what some people have found quite challenging to accept, including in the countries, in Scandinavia and the Nordic countries, where other gender equality indicators look great. Organizations have internal hierarchies that bestow authority and power on more senior staff, and sexual harassment is the exercise of this institutionally gifted power that resonates with social structures outside that institution. We propose new guidelines in the publication that we launch here today, and we talk about ending sexual harassment, not mitigating, not reducing, not dealing with, but ending sexual harassment, because it's what victims and survivors demand, because it's what's been promised in the Sustainable Development Goals, because it is part of the commitment to deliver CEDAW, ending discrimination, and because the new ILO Convention 190, passed in June this year, talks about the right to have workplaces free of violence and harassment. Under the notion of promoting collective ownership to end sexual harassment, we offer in the new publication ways to unpack and challenge cultural problematics of sexual harassment, highlighting the following areas of work. First of all, we want to ensure that two very commonly used expressions, zero tolerance and victim-centered approaches, often used in defense by an organization or an institution which has to deal with a scandal or the naming of cases of sexual harassment. We want to make sure that they are given meaning rather than just words that are used to distract attention. Zero tolerance means never doing nothing when there is sexual harassment. We've talked about 9 core elements of victim-centered approaches, which I will talk more about on Thursday in the panel on practices. We have, very fortunately, Professor Liz Kelly to have written a section around why training on sexual harassment that has been so popular for many decades has not worked, and in fact, in some cases, has been counterproductive. We want to ensure that the stigma that attaches to people who report and the credibility that still attaches to those who are accused is turned around so that reporting becomes a rational, not an irrational act. And we want to ensure that organizations where there is active work to address sexual harassment not only require reports to be made, because they're always saying, tell us, tell us, tell us, but take that information and disclose what they've done about reports, offering transparency on their work. The conference organizers ask us, why now and what about the Nordics? So let me just address those two questions. It's not been a surprise, I don't think, that MeToo has allowed women to speak. What is a surprise, and we know those who've worked on violence against women and issues of human rights for many years know that people will tell their stories. For me, a surprise has been how come people have listened at this time? And how come a tool which has been so very much an instrument of abuse, of harassment and silencing, various parts of social media, became the primary channel for women to be heard? And how come MeToo has had such an impact on the nature and content of public discourse? First of all, let's recognize that MeToo, though widely seen as beginning with Alyssa Milano's tweet, had a history before that, as has already been mentioned. Tarana Burke's work with black women and girls who had been sexually violated was about showing and building solidarity for work that included a drive towards healing and care. So MeToo was already about solidarity, about sexual abuse, and about a journey beyond harm. Secondly, Alyssa Milano's tweet did matter. It connected with a huge number of people, attracting 23,000 retweets and 51,000 likes on Twitter. She took the exercise of uncovering sexual harassment into a medium which was a primary communications channel across the world, and where she had a large audience with currently a following of 3.6 million. So there we had phenomenal reach and potential for connections. Thirdly, the movement reached beyond social media into some parts of traditional media, where serious journalists wrote serious pieces that paid women's voices attention. They bothered to find out their stories, they bothered to check them out and write them up, and they got them published in media in mainstream media, where so many people had access. And fourthly, and I think it's probably the most important part, women kept up the momentum. They kept speaking, they kept telling, they kept denouncing, and they kept demanding. And they did so from many parts of the world. They did so in many languages, and they did so using many different terms. We're just beginning a big data project looking at almost 37 million impressions on Twitter, using the hashtag MeToo and others associated with it. And we can see there, just preliminary analysis shows us that there is 1.7 million tweets in Japanese, a similar number in Korean, 900,000 in French, almost 20 million in English, 4.4 million in Spanish, and 184,000 in Sweden. Sweden has shocked so many because of the gender equality story there. It may not have reached all countries, but MeToo is international. It isn't confined only to the USA or to the English language. I have just a quick word cloud, if I can just share quickly, about the Nordics, which looks at 10,000 tweets across this region. And look at the words that come up there: feminism, women, gender equality, violence, time's up. I don't know some of those words, but the ones I know are quite significant, telling us how this conversation is framed. I want to conclude by saying that MeToo has been driven by and has allowed bonds to be forged between women who have named their abuse and those who have not been public about theirs. Together they have challenged the norm of public silence and broken the pattern of women's required acquiescence to sexualized expressions of gender equality in their search for justice. Some brave and committed journalists have shaped a new media response to women's outing of their abuse. The MeToo movement demands validation, redress, and transformation. It has gathered courage to denounce what is regarded as inevitable and normal. The movement has shown bravery in challenging the privilege inherent in the power to abuse. And it has shown incredible audacity in saying no longer will the unaccountability of the powerful be tolerated. The movement has prized open a door, showing us what is needed to make our promises and legal obligations have meaning. Now our task is to go through that door and to honour the calls and demands of those women, to deliver what they demand. We have to move from institutional betrayal to institutional courage. We have to refrain from just picking the low-hanging fruit and commit to the long haul of changing structures, changing cultures, addressing stereotypes, and delivering justice. The best use of our time together is to spell out how to make this happen. I know that we all in this room have contributions to make to that conversation, and we hope that the publication we're launching today will be part of that offer. I end with the honour of presenting our new publication to the Prime Minister. It addresses the question, what will it take to end sexual harassment? I look forward to supporting you in this work from UN Women and to working with all the troublemakers in this room to make a different world. Thank you, Purna.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for a very excellent speech.